All right, welcome. Okay, I hope you're getting your groove on with that music. Very 8-bit, nice one. Okay, welcome. I'm David Bevan from the Alan Turing Institute Research Engineering Group, and a warm welcome from me and everyone from Turing Data Stories. First of all, can I ask you to edit your Zoom name? There should be little three dots that will appear at the top right when you hover your mouse over your lovely faces. Let us know your affiliation and pronouns. We're all friends now. Turing Data Stories is a super big collaboration, and you're going to hear from all of us at some point. I'm just here to kick things off and attempt to keep to time. But can I ask everybody from Turing Data Stories to give a nice warm wave to everyone? Hello. And if you want, make sure you flip your Zoom thing to gallery view so we can see all of you and you can see all of us. This is going to be interactive, and in the interest of minimizing disruption, please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, but do use the Zoom handy raisey feature at the bottom, which I think lives under reactions nowadays, if you do want to chip in, and we're here to collaborate and chat, so you will be making use of that. Okay, first of all, I want to take you through a little HackMD document, so I'm going to put that in the chat. Where's my chat window gone? It's hiding. There we go. If I can ask you all to pop along there, you will need to be signed into HackMD to make changes. And if you don't have a HackMD account, now is the time to do that. And if you're still stuck in a couple of minutes' time, message me directly on the chat and I can help out there. So I will quickly share my screen and we'll go through that document together. How's that sound? All right, here we go. So participant people, first of all, the workshop organizers, that's us lot. Hello. Participants, that's you lot. Welcome. If you can put your names in there so we know who you are. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we can keep in contact with you. So do say explicitly whether we can do that. But you can use a pseudonym if you prefer, and I guess you'll get points for the more inventive one, the better. We've got an icebreaker. Okay, we've got two responses. A user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. Not sure if you even get a groan for that, whoever that was. But this is your icebreaker. Please chip in as you'll be attentively listening to everybody else, but you can also do some text here. Most importantly, keep it clean because, of course, the conference has a code of conduct, as do we. So if you want details of that, it's there. If you want to raise any issues, contact one of the many organizers of this session, which you'll find at the top, or of the conference. Let's hope nobody uses that. Most importantly, here's the timetable. This is what you've got ahead of you today. So first of all, we want to tell you what a Turing data story is and get to hear from some previous authors so you know what to expect and what you'll get out of it. Then we'll gather your skills and ideas for stories and do a bit of self-organizing. We'll put you into a number of breakout rooms and put you to work. We'll be there to facilitate things and chip in, of course. And then after that, we'll come back together to hear what you've been up to and to share what you've been creating before the end. So that's what you've got ahead of yourselves. If I stop sharing my screen, any questions on that? Good. Okay. Please, we need better jokes. So the icebreaker, I'll be keeping an eye out on that. In which case, I'm very happy to move on. So Sam, if I can ask you to share your screen, and Sam and many others are going to tell you all about Turing data stories. Sam, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to hope people can see the share. I can't even see the share at the moment. Okay, here we go. So I think Kevin's just dropped out. So he was gonna take you through the first few slides, but I'll do it unless he pipes up. So we are Turing Data Stories, as David very nicely introduced. And our kind of tagline is that we're an open community creating these data stories, which are a reproducible and pedagogical mix of open data, code, narrative, and visuals to help understand the data-driven world around us. So we're going to start with a little bit of a history of the project. So this all started back in May 2020 as a group of volunteers, people loosely associated with the Alan Turing Institute. And there was many people in this kind of network in the data science, research, software engineering community that wanted to help with some sort of response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which was developing at this time. And we also had people who wanted to develop their technical skills in lockdown and kind of upskill in different areas, but people weren't sure where to start. So we had this kind of piece, and then we also thought, as we were looking into the government reporting of COVID-19 data back in the very early days, that there was kind of more that could be done, and the reporting was not as accessible or complete as it could have been. So we started the project, and we hoped that we could kind of help people to learn data science through storytelling and examples of really high quality data analysis that were relevant to some real world application that people would actually be interested in. So what is a Turing data story? So in its current kind of incarnation, a Turing data story is just a humble Jupyter notebook that documents some kind of interesting insight using real world open data. So we have a few kind of requirements of things that these Jupyter notebooks should do. So they should be told in a pedagogical way. So we want people who can read these stories or read these notebooks to be able to learn not only kind of best practices for software development and data science, but also to learn something interesting about a problem in society or just an area that they don't know something about. It should be fully reproducible. So we want people to be able to take everything we've done and reproduce it completely. And then also, hopefully this encourages people to build off and extend what we publish. The notebook should be transparent as well. So this means in terms of the data we're using, we want it to be have a clear provenance. And we also want the process of publishing the stories to be transparent. So we have a peer review process for each story where other contributors will review the story, and this peer review process is completely open and transparent. And so, yeah, this is an open source project, and anyone can submit a data story, and it doesn't have to be some crazy sophisticated high-tech analysis, just interesting stories told with open data. So I'll hand over to Bill for a couple of slides.
Great, thanks, Sam. So I'm Bill Finnegan. I'm a doctoral student, and I'm a relative newcomer to Turing Data Stories. So I kind of found out about it through the Engage at Turing program earlier this year, and I'm hoping to participate even more with the enrichment program starting in January. But I wouldn't identify as a data scientist or a research software engineer. So my perspective is less on the technical side, more on the storytelling side. I'm very interested in how data is used to engage and inform, to tell stories. And so from this experience, there's plenty of ways for people to get involved. There's people with different skill sets can be involved with different roles. And this group has been very welcoming and inclusive. And so this slide kind of outlines some of the different dimensions or roles of contributing. And it's also something that we'll be kind of revisiting in the kind of practical way when we get to the breakout groups later. So for the next slide, in terms of story generation, a story, it starts with an idea, or kind of perhaps starts with data. And for example, when I joined this group, I'd been wondering for a while about the Radio 4 program Desert Island Discs. There's an archive on the BBC website. It goes back to 1942. And I just thought there's something there where we could explore something about people and music tastes over time. But it's completely unrelated to my research, which is around sustainability. And so I just thought it'd be a fun story to dig into. So kind of just coming from a story and bringing it to this group. And there might be other cases where about some data, open data, and there is a story there, but you don't even know what it is. You just think it'd be good data to explore. And I guess one other thought on this is I feel like in kind of academic research circles, people can be somewhat proprietary about their ideas and their data. And as Sam was saying, this is all about openness, transparency, and it's a really collaborative group. And but that might mean that there are some stories that don't fit here. It's if there's it's not kind of full-blown publishable, fundable research projects, but something that might be topical or kind of tangential to your mainstay of your research, but you're still kind of made you think, oh, this could be fun to dig into if I had more time or people to work with, or just exploratory if there might be something there that you'd like to spend some time on. So yeah, but it starts with a story or it starts with data. And I'll pass it back to Sam now to talk about the technical side.
Yeah, so you can come to us with, as Bill said, an idea for a story or some interesting data set that you think could contain a story in some form. And then another way in which, another kind of role in which people contribute to the project is through technical work. And so this is really the meat and gravy of the project. So this is doing things like data analysis, looking at these data sets, working out how we can best visualize the data contained in them, writing high quality code and making sure it's documented with comments, of course, but also explained in kind of prose exactly the reasons behind the code choices that have been made. And then there's also kind of infrastructure development of the project. So we have these notebooks, and then they get converted at the moment to some static HTML pages, which then are published on a GitHub site. And then there's links back to kind of binder environments. But this is all stuff that's kind of under development and can be improved as we go.
And yeah, hop back in on this. Once a story is completed or the technical side of a story is completed, there are additional ways to get involved. So as Sam mentioned before, every story is peer reviewed. And I just mentioned that it's both a kind of a technical and a non-technical review. We're looking at the structure of the narrative, the clarity of the language, as well as the analysis. And then we're thinking more and more about how we get these stories out in the world. So, time gets put into a Twitter thread or liaising with the Turing comms team to share it through different channels. And then, of course, there's just kind of the project management side of keeping this going. As you might have noticed, we kind of communicate through Slack, and that there's that kind of group of people who are working on this, again, very collaboratively. But as more and more stories are generated, we're also thinking that as this grows, there's more opportunity for that kind of community to develop around storytelling and that outreach, that impact in the world. So now I think I'll pass it over to Camilla.
Okay, so yeah, as Phil said, we have this peer review process. So we have two reviewers that will will review the story from different points of view, from pedagogical, from the storytelling, and from the analytical side as well. And with the view that maybe the stories can be used to learn and to teach as well. And we make sure that there is that they follow some documented standards from data transparency, reproducibility, and pedagogy. And also we kind of something we did in the last months was we created an ethics approval process as well that gets reviewed, and it gets agreed by the contributors to make sure that we don't do anything that can cause harm or using data that can harm individuals and things like that. So if we go to the next slide. And okay, so we just wanted to make a little shout out to our kind of incubator. So this idea started over a year ago, but we didn't really know. Well, we had these ideas of how to make an open project, but we were part of the Open Life Science 2 cohort. And it really helped us to start from what it was just an idea and a story we were working on together into what you see now, that is more like an open project for an open community. So we just wanted to, if you hear about it, and if you have a project that you want for it to be open, the Open Life Science opens cohorts a couple of times a year, and we will recommend that as it's a very good program. So if we go to the next slide. So yeah, you'll hear more about it, but we have some links that you can join from now if you want. So we have a Slack, so it's a place where we can just talk about stories with data stories, where we organize when we create new stories and just meet people like-minded. We had the GitHub page, so you can see there is also in the HackMD. We also have our Twitter account, and I did put in the chat just recently the fast pages, so you can see how the stories look at the end after they've been published. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so now we go to the next part of this workshop. We are going to have Eric, who is going to talk from the contributor side of view, how his experience has been, and he's going to show a data story he's been working on. So I think we let Eric to share the screen
now. Thanks all. So yes, I'm pleased to be here today to talk a little bit about my experience having contributed a few stories now to the Turing Data Stories community. I think their goal of encouraging people to do open, reproducible analysis of topics that are relevant to the current narrative in our worlds right now are really motivational for me. So my involvement with this got started following the 2020 US election, actually. So Camilla posted, these were in the days after the election had occurred, but the results had not been officially determined because there were so many mail-in ballots to count. And Camilla sort of, very cleverly posted back the Excel analysis that she did, and it led me to a question of, well, is there something more sophisticated, interesting that we might do from that, which sort of led to me getting involved with Turing Data Stories as a contributor to actually write a story to do such an analysis. I had great fun doing that. It's sort of satisfied a number of different goals I've had recently to do a bit more actual hands-on data science. I think a lot of my work life is spent writing software for sort of obscure, computational methodologies in science and engineering, which I think sort of misses some of that interesting, get your hands dirty, just kind of mucking around with data that I think all of us really enjoy. So just to kind of give a bit of an overview of how I've approached this, I thought I would briefly discuss a story that I'm close to finishing at the moment. This is currently in the in-revision stage. So I've written it, and it's gotten reviews from the community who have always been very helpful in giving good feedback, both on the analysis details, but also on the narrative. If I'm clear about things, if I go off down rabbit holes that are not really that enlightening when you actually look at the story from a fresh perspective. So I do think that's a great thing. So let me go ahead and share my screen. If I can find my window. So yes, so this is an in-progress Turing data story. It's about looking at building a model to take COVID-19 positive tests and try to learn what we can about when people go into hospital following a positive test, if they do end up needing to be admitted to hospital. So this was actually inspired by just a comment made by, at the time, the new health secretary, Sajid Javid, saying that the vaccination program had been tremendously successful. And I asked myself, I wonder how much that is reflected in the data. Not that I'm necessarily claiming that he's being dishonest or anything like that, but I was very curious. I was like, I wonder how easy it is to convince myself that that is true. And as Camilla mentioned, or I can't remember, maybe Camilla or Dave or Sam at the beginning mentioned that at the beginning of the lockdown, there wasn't as much public data about COVID in a number of different countries. But one thing that's nice about the UK is now there is a very accessible UK COVID-19 data website with a nice API that lets you take a look at the exact data that I would need to actually go ahead and test this hypothesis. So this particular story just started with a question and a data set, and then I just kind of rock and rolled from there. So I'm very interested in Bayesian modeling. So a lot of the stories that I've written have had a flavor of building some sort of Bayesian inferential model to quantify uncertainty. That's not to say that that's the only approach that one can take, but that sort of resonated most with my interests, scientifically and developing various skills. So basically from there, I write some code to access the data, make some plots to visualize that. And usually I kind of start this up with just a bunch of code cells, not a lot of narrative, and the narrative kind of builds up around it as I hone in on the analysis that I think makes the most sense given the particular story. So in this case, we can look at the daily positive tests. We can look at the hospital admissions and say, okay, and we have some data. Let's try and build a model that connects the two. So I won't go into too much detail about that, but the outcome is that and then as you can see, there's quite a bit of text here explaining the details of both the model that I build, the methods that I use for fitting it. I think there's quite a bit of latitude within the idea of a data story of how much detail you can go into on that. I think part of my interests are confirming that I really understand what I'm doing when I do the data science type models. So for me, giving a very clear explanation for the underlying mathematical methods, is really something that I care a lot about. So I think getting feedback from people that may not be as knowledgeable about that has been a great part of being part of this community. So then we get down to the end and you get some nice little graphs that you can show when you actually compare the data to your model and talk about the things you can learn from that, the caveats, that's an interesting question. I wonder if there's data that I can explore that question further, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the feedback from others, the fact that this is done collaboratively and openly, really helps make this more of a dynamic process than you just sort of sitting there cranking away with some analysis yourself. And these, I think, always one thing I always like to do is you say the goal is to try and predict things. So the one thing that was nice about this story is that it actually made some kind of I think prediction. And this is one thing that this is still ongoing. So once I've written this story, I can keep running this notebook again as more data comes out, and I can see if the model still is giving useful predictions, things like that. So I do think that there's room for this to be a very dynamic and growing process, and not just sort of a static, here's what happened kind of thing. So I think that's kind of that's probably enough of me going on and on about this. But anyways, I've really enjoyed working with the team, as well as some of the other reviewers, as other members of the community that have chipped in and given me helpful feedback on my work. So hope this was enlightening and encourage you to get going and start working on some interesting contribution to the community.
Thanks very much, Eric. That's inspirational. Okay, we've got 5 minutes or so before I move on to Helen to put you to hard work. Any questions to Eric or the presentation and any of the speakers that you heard from immediately before that? It's a little unfair. I realize we're outnumbering the participants, but it's okay. We'll absorb you into Turing Data Stories before you're finished today, so we'll all be on the same side. Okay, I think you've had time to mull that over. If there's no questions, then shall we crack on? Oh, Sam's sharing the screen. Here we go. Okay, Helen.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Helen. I'm a fairly new starter at Turing and therefore a new starter at the Turing Data Stories as well. I've been here a couple of months, and I'm just going to talk you through what we're hoping to get out of today and what we're hoping you'll be able to do. So as I'm chatting, please do start filling in the HackMD. So there should be a link in the chat, and that QR code should take you to it. Oh, thank you, yep. So we're trying to identify ideas and skills that we have with us today that we can use to turn into a story, or at least the start of a story. So to help with this, we've identified kind of 4 categories of skills that we'd like you to consider where you fit within that. And there's probably going to be a lot of crossover with these. And again, you're going to get a bit of repetition from me here. So we have story generation. So this is either you have a story idea or you have some data that you'd like to be analysed, some code, communication and community. So just very briefly to go over these and what they can mean to us. So for story generation, if you have access to some really interesting and open source data you'd like to see analysed, perhaps you can pop your name down in the HackMD under the Gather Skills section there for data interpretation, data. Maybe you've got an idea for a story. I've had a few kind of floating around, but you don't know where to find the data for it. That would kind of fall under our story generation and data idea. If you do have an idea like this, if you do have something that's, you know, piqued your interest, at the end of this session, once we've given a few examples ourselves, do feel free to give your own elevator pitch, a 1 minute kind of, oh, I've got this idea about X, Y, and Z, and maybe it would be interesting. We'd love to hear from you about any ideas that you do have. Perhaps you actually have a very specific skill set about coding. Perhaps you're an expert on networks or Bayesian analysis, and you want to apply it to a new problem, but you don't actually have a problem to apply it to. Then again, pop your name down in the Gathering Skills section on the HackMD. Maybe you are a really great storyteller and you can pull together a nice narrative. If so, then we can use your communication skills. And then, you know, perhaps you're like me, perhaps you're just excited to be here. You may not necessarily fit well into any of the other categories, but that doesn't mean you can't contribute. We're always looking for ways to improve our practices, our documentations. As Eric said, we have reviewers as well. And we're even interested in improving our infrastructure. So if you have a look at what everyone else is writing on the HackMD, have a look, see if you can fit in with any of those fields, or if any of the ideas pique your interest, and we'll try and fit everyone in together. So if we just go to the next slide. Yeah, so in a minute or so, you're going to hear a few elevator pitches from us. But if you do come up with an idea by the time that we've finished, we'd love for you to give us your own pitch at the end and just let us know what you think. But to summarize, the idea for the rest of the session is that we will identify what key skills everyone here has, and what aspects interest you the most. You know, just because you're really good at code doesn't mean you necessarily want to do it for this. Maybe you want to work on the narrative instead. So pop your name down in HackMD against projects or ideas that you think are interesting. We're going to try and match people with projects and form a few well-rounded teams. And while you're having to think about all this, I think Christina is going to introduce her story idea.
Hi guys. Yeah, so I'll do my kind of 1 minute elevator pitch on the story that I've started developing, but I think I need a bit of crowdsourced help from the community to really develop the narrative and obviously the code alongside that. So I've kind of put a brief intro to my story idea under the Gather Skills section. And I'm really interested in looking at the intersection of air quality and health in London and in the centre of London, particularly with the Breathe London dataset. So that's a dataset of over 900 different sensors, ground sensors across London that are collecting data on PM2.5 and NO2. So these are two kind of pollutants that are often associated with poor air quality and emissions from fuel and polluting vehicles. So I really want to look at the kind of the correlation with that and kind of lockdown events or different kind of transportation activity behaviour within central London, especially over the last year, as that's a completely new scenario that we had in the city. Like, it was completely dead at some points, and can we identify those kind of events through the PM2.5 information? And as well as that, I want to look at the intersection of, that with sensitive locations such as schools and hospitals. And so a lot of the sensors were actually attached onto these sensitive locations. So can we see there are particularly bad or better PM2.5 or air pollution levels around these areas, or are we seeing that there are actually intersections of high PM2.5 around these sensitive locations? As well as this, I did a bit of initial exploration on the data, and I saw that there was a really interesting kind of peak in late August and early September that occurred across multiple sensors in the city. And I was just kind of curious as to what that was, and could we identify what the source of that was. Ironically, it was actually coming up in both pre-COVID and post-COVID years. So yeah, just a deep dive into that as well. But obviously these aren't a full story idea at the moment, so I'm really looking for people with that kind of story narrative background, as well as people who help me work on the code. Thanks.
Okay, and I think our next person is going to be, is it Bill? I think the next.
Sure, yeah, I can mention story. So earlier I mentioned the kind of desert island discs as a story, and it's a story in progress that we're working on. A number of people in this group have been contributing, and as we dug into it, there's one particular thing which we think is maybe like a mini story, and so that's what I've kind of proposed as a potential breakout, or again, if anyone who's interested in digging into it. So we're pulling information from Spotify for the songs. In the Desert Island Discs, there's a new guest each week, and they pick 8 songs to kind of tell the story of their life. And we wanted to map how genres had changed over time, because we actually knew that there was a huge amount of classical music for the first few decades of the show, and then that's changed more recently. And so we were thinking in kind of broadly, kind of big recognizable genres that everyone knows. And then we got the data from Spotify. For each artist, it'll have a list of genres, and some of them are really obscure. And so we suddenly were faced with this question of, well, what do we do with all of these somewhat random genres to kind of put together, from micro genre to meta genre, and so that we can kind of not overwhelm people with this information. And we kind of initially just kind of tried to like map it. Classic rock is rock, and sometimes there are these subgenres which are completely contained within a bigger genre, but sometimes there's kind of strange overlap, and so it seems like there might be a more computational way to approach this. And so that's the pitch. How do you go from micro to meta based on the data set? Maybe thinking about network analysis, maybe just thinking about kind of starting from the biggest genres and removing them first, which was some advice we got from the person behind everynoise.com, which if you ever want to explore the micro genres of Spotify, I recommend. It will blow your mind. So yeah, that's the short pitch, genres.
Thank you very much. I think Sam's next to give his elevator pitch.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So a few weeks ago, I saw a headline in the news about some new research that had come out on the social cost of climate change, which is an area that I'm very interested in, and I thought this could make a good basis for a data story. But this is kind of early stage idea, so it still needs to be fleshed and scoped out. But effectively, there's this research in which the authors have developed a model that can estimate the number of excess deaths that will be caused due to the effects of climate change over the next 100 years, or they even go all the way out to, I think, 2500. And so they can get a quantitative relationship between kilograms of CO2 put into the atmosphere and number of mortalities that will result from that CO2 being in the atmosphere, which I thought was quite a powerful way to kind of link emissions to a meaningful outcome that people can really quantify and relate to. So there are several things we can do with this model, and the outputs from the model, at the moment, the model is kind of scattered across all these kind of MATLAB and starter Excel scripts, and it's a bit of a jumble. So one thing we could do is, in the interest of reproducibility, kind of re-implement the model in a nice, neat way. And then there's various ways which we could also extend and modify it. And a kind of another option would be to just take the outputs of the model and make some plots from them and discuss them in more detail. But this is, just a very raw idea. But if that sounds interesting to you, then we can definitely discuss it over the next couple of hours.
Thanks, Sam. And I think last but not least, we've got Luke with a slightly different theme.
Yes, slightly different as well. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Luke is my name, and I am interested in the infrastructure of the Turing Data Stories project. Specifically, how can we set it up in order to best facilitate external contributors with different skills from diverse backgrounds, and to ensure that our analysis is fully reproducible. So I won't bore you with the details now, but essentially the current setup limits us to just one environment, and we want to make sure that our contributors have the flexibility to use as many different software tools and packages as they possibly can. So at the moment, we are limited to Python 3 notebooks, which is quite a significant limitation. But we would like to open this up so that people can come in and they can use R or Julia or whatever software that they like in order to write their stories, which would be beneficial both for the authors and also for the readers. So today I want your help to brainstorm what the new project infrastructure would look like, and maybe we could even hack together a little POC to see if we can make it a little bit more flexible and accessible to everybody who wants to contribute. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. So we've got a little bit of time now, and I can see that people are writing in the HackMD and filling in. I just wonder if any of the people who've joined for SeptembRSE had any elevator pitches, anything that had popped to mind in the last few minutes that they wanted to share. It doesn't have to be a fully formed thought. Pop your hand up or unmute yourself and chat if you can. I'll give you a minute or two. There's no pressure if not. We've got a few things we can work on, but if you've got a hint of an idea or something, then we're very happy to chat about it and have a think and see what we can do with it.
In HackMD, I can see Andrew under ideas generation at the top has been sketching some thoughts. I don't know whether Andrew wants to uncloak and say something to that.
I don't know quite what much else to say about it. It was basically inspired by reading the baseball replacement story yesterday and wondering whether there was some more interesting analysis that could be done on sports statistics, that sort of thing. I outlined a very simple one there that my wife has always asked me and I never know the answer to. It's the number of yellow cards a football team receives inversely proportional to the result that they get. So if like one team gets 4 yellow cards, another team gets 1, is the result 4-1 or whatever in the other direction, that sort of thing? Or do you always win if you get less yellow cards, for example? But I imagine you could do something very similar with an NFL database, for example, like because obviously penalties in the NFL are very bad, generally very bad things to concede, because it means you either have much further to go or you give the other team less far to go. So it's probably more easily correlatable and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's where my thoughts are at the moment.
I think that sounds really interesting, and kind of to branch off from that, the most statistical type sport you could look at. I mean, I think probably baseball is going to be one of the ones with the hardest stats or the most stats around it. But yeah, it's a very interesting idea. Thank you. Was there anyone else who wanted to drop in and say anything or had any ideas?
I guess maybe this is actually a bit of a follow-up on some of the kind of the sports analysis, but something that maybe some people are kind of interested actually is to do with esports, so with kind of video games, just because the amount of data available in these games is actually quite incredible, in the sense that a character, you might have kind of, for example, their location as like a coordinates kind of tracked across the entire game, kind of the resources, stats, and all of these things. And I've seen a lot of data analysis in this sort of area as well. So I think the sort of sports analysis is really something that's going to be increasing quite a lot over time.
Okay, I think we're all quite excited about this sports story now, Andrew. I think you may have set yourself up with a story idea there. Just give everyone a minute or two if you have any comments you'd like to make on the sports story. I mean, I know nothing about sports myself, but a lot of the time that doesn't matter. You play with the data and see what you get. So
I was going to say something that jumped out at me in your description of it, Andrew, was that idea of discipline and kind of like as a concept, how do you quantify if a team is more disciplined or less? And yeah, again, maybe I've been watching Ted Lasso, the TV show about a coach, and yeah, so themes like that, kind of you just in the locker room, how does that translate to on the pitch, translate into the results?
So for everybody else, if you do want to, if any of the story pictures that you've seen in the HackMD, in the project sign up or anywhere do particularly interest you, just pop your names down. I'm just having a little scroll now just to see who's where. I can see there's quite a few people online and it's being edited as we speak. So just a name and a yeah, me or something like that, if there's something that you'd rather work on, and we'll try and get a couple of working groups together and see what we how we go.
To just respond to your message, Tim, actually in the chat, is there kind of an esports, I guess, that you're mostly interested in, that you might want to write something on?
Yeah, there's a particular one which I follow, and they've actually been using this year for their season. They've been using IBM Watson to analyze particular players and then rank them on their specific heroes and characters. So I wondered whether there could be something where you could pull down map history alongside kind of the already hard work done of IBM Watson to analyze particular plays to then create some kind of trend to predict results then going forward, and then it'd be quite interesting to see how accurate those were, to kind of see the influence of kind of the hard measurable skills versus the soft immeasurable skills of I don't know, teamwork and collaboration and particular hype going into a game or something along those lines.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Did you know, as in, you have to kind of say what game it is? Like I can start looking a bit around what sort of data might be available for something like that.
Yeah, so it's the Overwatch League, and I believe Blizzard have got APIs for it.
Oh, okay.
To pull the data down. I started looking at it a while ago, but just never got anywhere.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I'll take a look at the data. And do you want to kind of just add something to the HackMD as well, and then we can maybe follow up, or kind of look into this today as well?
Okay, so I think we've got kind of two user-generated stories going here. I think we feel that esports and physical sports, I guess, are different enough. We've got a couple of attendees who haven't said anything yet. If you want to pop in the chat or in the HackMD anything that you feel, or you can just unmute and say. If you'd particularly like to join one of these two groups or one of the ones that we've suggested. Or I think, Richard, you might be muted if you're trying to talk. I'm assuming you're able to unmute yourself. If you're not,
sorry, me. Yeah, only Richard. No, I wasn't trying to talk, but I can talk if you want me to.
Well, we've got you now. Any of those kind of pique your interest at all, or you think there's
the Desert Island Discs one sounds interesting. I was just trying to write something in the HackMD.
Okay.
I've never actually used HackMD before, so I'm trying to figure out how to write stuff into it.
We're checking the chat as well. If that's too much, we can check the chat for both of you actually. So don't worry too much. But yeah, the Desert Island Discs is one that we're kind of actively working on at the moment. We've got quite a bit of data that we're working on. So okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly. Gantus, is it?
Yeah, Gantus it is.
Sorry,
yeah, it's Gantus. Yeah, anyway, you can just call me GT.
Did any of those pique your interest at all? Did any?
Yeah, I was interested in idea from Christina, the air quality of London. So, but yeah, I am interested in that. But I'm just see what's what is that data story. So I'm just want to observe if.
Okay. Okay. Well, we have all our contact information there as well. So you're very welcome to join in and contribute post this session. We're very keen for people to join us. So that's fantastic. I think we've probably got enough info to start trying to make groups of people. If that sounds sensible to everyone. Maybe David, you want to?
That sounds good. If you shout out the groups, I will make breakout rooms. So far, I've made one. I think there's going to be a call for one on infrastructure. I can see the esports one. I can see the sports discipline result one. For want of a better word, Andrew, you'll probably have to work on what you want to call it. What else have we got going on then?
I think the air quality maybe, but it's if GT wants to do that with Christina, and I can maybe pop in as well, or if we want to join another one of the three groups.
Also the Island Discs one as well.
Yeah, I could work with Richard on that. I guess it's a question of how. I mean, do we want to actually take a break and discuss the best strategy on how we?
That sounds good. And we are almost at that point in the program as well, aren't we? For a 5-minute tea break and.
Yeah, that's perfect. So shall we take a break and we'll come back at 11 o'clock. And by then we might have some way of organizing ourselves. So put the kettle on, sit back, relax, and we'll see you in 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a chance to recharge your batteries for 5 minutes. Don't worry if you haven't. I think we're still coming up with a bit of a plan. Luke, is that tea or coffee?
Coffee, of course.
Coffee, of course. I'm on fruit tea. I don't know why. I need caffeine. I think there's discussions behind the scenes as to how we can self-divide, so I'm going to wait until Helen is completely comfy.
Frantically typing into the Slack and the HackMD at the moment. We're getting there though.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we were perhaps expecting the opposite problem with fewer ideas. So it's good to have this challenge. So we want to make sure we can move ahead with as many as possible, as long as we don't desert people and just leave you with one person in a room. I think for this next bit, I will float amongst the groups, and I'm here to help you with anything as we go along. Aha, okay. I'm making some breakout rooms ahead of this.
Maybe before we move to the breakout rooms, we can talk about the outcomes. We haven't discussed yet.
You're quite right, Camilla. If I am jumping the gun, put me straight. I wasn't actually going to assign anybody quite yet.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna share my screen and just show like the ideas of what we can expect from today, the next 2 hours, which is not that much. So I'm sharing my screen now. Okay. So yeah, so we know that we have very limited amount of time, and we're not writing a story takes longer than these 2 hours. So we wanted to tell you which kind of things can be a good outcome from the workshop. So the first thing could be just write a short outline description of the story as a GitHub issue. That's how when people propose new stories, they come as GitHub issues in the repo. And if you click here, for example, you could see all the ideas of stories that have been proposed. Some are ongoing, some are still not. So that could be a first thing. Then the next best thing is to find the data sets that we're going to use. Sometimes we might already have data sets, but and attach them to the issue. And then the third thing will be we'll start thinking about an outline, like which are the questions you want to ask to the data set, or which kind of narrative we want to have. And then the fourth one, if we can get to start actually writing code, would be great. And we'll start maybe make a plot or make a figure or write an introduction of what we want to show. If we're working in groups, which since we will, we can use Google Colab because it's the easiest way to collaborate on a notebook. And well, the last outcome, and it's extremely wishful thinking, is if we have a story completely written in the next 2 hours, you can submit a pull request to the repo to start a review process. We don't expect anyone to get there. We know there's not enough time, but I think at least these few first steps and maybe a plot will be nice. And we'll work with you. You're not going to be working alone. We are all assigning ourselves to the different groups to work together. So yes, is there any questions about that? Okay, no.
Is anybody not listed in a group yet? That's what I was wondering.
I think just Sam. Solved.
Great, that's it. And I'm going to move around. I'll probably move around the smaller groups first. All right, I think everybody should be joining us here shortly. Sam, you're going to take us through this next bit. If I'm right, it takes a while for everybody to get flushed out of the rooms. 15 seconds and counting, and then there'll be an influx. All right, I think that's everybody back in the main session. So thank you all. I had the pleasure of darting about from place to place, and I know what you've been up to, but you don't necessarily know what the others have been up to. So Sam is going to chair this next little report back show and tell session, and we look forward to showing and telling. Sam, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, David. So I think my role will be pretty minimal. I'm going to invite people from the different groups to chat about what they got up to. So does anyone particularly want to get us started? Otherwise, I will choose someone at random.
I'm happy to get started just because I also need to head off to a meeting quite shortly. So Tim, we were with Tim, but Tim had to leave at 12:30 as well. I guess he had another meeting too, and with Helen. And we were kind of looking at the Overwatch League statistics. So Overwatch is kind of like a 6 versus 6 game played across different maps with different objectives. And the key thing here is that the maps are asymmetrical. So it's not like football where both teams are doing trying to do the same thing. In these, one side may be attacking, one side may be defending specifically. So the idea on kind of the Overwatch League data, like they've really got CSVs of kind of match results data. So saying, okay, well, this team playing against this team, taking this sort of on this map led to this kind of result. So they have loads of this kind of map data across all of their games. There's also data on kind of how good a team is overall as like a power ranking sort of thing. So I think we're quite interested in taking both of these 2 data points and then kind of creating some sort of predictor for, okay, given a map and given like the map attacking and defending roles and with 2 kind of teams, what's the chance that a team will win in this situation? So we'd be quite interested in understanding that by figuring out how good certain teams are at certain maps and at certain whether they're better as an attacker or better as a defender, say.
Cool.
And we have our issue as well, I think.
Yeah, I've seen the link from Helen.
Oh, great.
So that's for the collab, but there is a link in that to the issue as well. It's number 163.
Oh yeah, wow. This is fleshed out. Looks great. Okay. So yeah, we've got the description, Kevin said, and then you've also been identifying these sources of data. And there's the IBM Watson. Did you look into what was available with the kind of analytics that Watson is doing on the games?
We had a brief look, and interestingly enough, they don't have an API for the Overwatch. They do for a lot of the others. So web scraper it might be, but I think IBM have stopped sponsoring Blizzard as of last month, and we're not sure what that means for data and things like that as well. So there's a comment in the issue about that as well.
Okay, so potentially some things to think about in terms of data availability, and then you also had some thoughts on different methods. So if you're wanting to kind of make some predictive way of guessing who's going to win, whether or not you're using some Bayesian technique or otherwise, I guess that will kind of depend on exactly the data that you are able to get your hands on.
And I think for me, at least, who's never really done anything with Overwatch, interpreting what all of these stats actually mean is the key thing for the first stage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Cool. Anything else on that to share?
I'll need to head off now, but thanks so much, everyone.
Cool, Kevin. Good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Just to say that yeah, Tim had to nip off before this finished, but he seems quite eager to stay in touch. I know he's put his details in the HackMD, and if it's something that we could move forward with, that I think that would be quite interesting. Pretty steep learning curve for me, but there seems to be a lot of data around. It's just finding it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that aspect of having like really a lot of quantitative stats available that can just be siphoned off the raw, I don't know, from the game engine itself is quite an interesting prospect. And of course, all this stuff is like been making headlines in recent years about the kind of artificial intelligence piece around it, of getting agents to play the games themselves. So there's that kind of angle as well. Cool. All right. Anyone want to go next? Otherwise, I didn't hear anything from Christina and Gantugs on the air quality. So do you guys want to chat about what you got up to?
Gantugs, do you want to go ahead and talk about the notebook and what we discussed? If not, I can take a stab at it.
Actually, can you take over?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, obviously, I came to the session with some initial analysis done on the pollution data in London. And so we ran through that, and that was really helpful. It was really helpful to get some feedback, actually, from someone who was seeing the data and the analysis with fresh eyes, which I guess, really supports the idea of having this role of a reviewer in the community. Having someone who does review your work, even if they don't contribute directly, is really helpful. Mm-hmm. Discussed was different potential story ideas. So Kenton came up with a good idea of looking at how if a station location, so this is where the PM 2.5 is actually being measured, is intersecting a junction, then can we actually look at and see if those junctions are like validating our understanding that that would be a higher air pollution location.
In roads.
Yeah, a road junction.
Okay.
And so, then we also took that idea further and said, like, what would it be a really interesting story to kind of show the worst street in London to live on in terms of air pollution? I think that would be, quite a motivating little story idea there. So we ended up kind of spending most of the time just talking about some story ideas. And in the end, we started working on kind of looking at fleshing out some really interesting graphics around this idea. So taking a look at those daily or like hourly pollution concentration time series graphs, and then taking the location of those as well, and producing some visualizations that would show, depending on what in the city where you are, how that pollution level is varying. So we started working on that, and then also started looking at, is there any difference that we see between like roadside located sensors versus urban background? So I've been producing some box plots on those.
Wow.
And yeah, haven't opened an issue yet. And I guess feedback for the community is, obviously it's really cool to work on the collaborative stories together. But I think we struggled a little bit with collab, just because working synchronously does kind of strangely overwrite your code, and so we'll have to find a good solution to that. But yeah, in general, like, I hope I speak for both of us, that was an enjoyable session to kind of just focus on the story for half an hour and really deep dive into the data.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot done. In terms of the collab thing, yeah, I don't know. One thing that I've tried successfully in the past is like I can't remember. There's a kind of paradigm or like buzzword where it's like there's a driver and there's like someone else who's kind of navigating, and one person is kind of on the keyboard and the other person is kind of thinking but not writing code, and then you kind of connect via that. But I guess that's limited to basically 2 people, otherwise you start to have too many voices coming at you. So that's one thing we could explore. Did you have any plots you wanted to share, Christina?
I have a really, really terrible one. I'll show you guys. It's just this small little thing that I was working on with these classifications that we actually did realize where there's a bit of a typo between these 2 urban background labels. But just kind of looking at, oh, okay, so we see that there's much wider distribution of curb size. So this is a PM2.5 concentration, but in general, it's kind of higher. And then, yeah, urban background seems to be a bit more concentrated in terms of the, yeah, the PM2.5 concentration, but on the whole, slightly lower on average. So I think what we're going to do is look at, firstly, consolidating these 2 labels, and then taking a look at, from the curbside and roadside locations, can we make a 3rd label of junction using maybe open source kind of road network data in London, and see if we then see an increased amount of PM2.5 from that. And yeah, and then also maybe look at street values and yeah, the story on where the worst street is in London to live.
Right. And so curbside and roadside here, what do you know the difference between the 2?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I realize that curbside isn't actually it's a very British term. So we had a bit of a mixed understanding of what that meant. Curbside, I think, is in general much closer to the road, despite the kind of confusion on the names. And there is another label saying distance from road. So we might actually validate what those mean with a bit more work on this story.
You know,
yeah.
who these sensors are maintained by?
I think it's like the GLA. I believe London is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a data set that I found through london.gov.uk, but I think it's GLA. But yeah, definitely worth looking for. Yeah, the making sure that the data quality is maintained. And yeah, we've noticed also that they don't have any data since November 2020. So definitely be worth getting some more updated stats on this.
Yeah, I have a friend who works in DEFRA, and she was doing this, working somehow in at one point in air quality, and she was saying there's some sort of standards which we're supposed to legally adhere to, and she was saying that there was all sorts of kind of like sneaky techniques of like building a sensor far away from a road and then like erecting a barrier between the road and the sensor to get like an artificially low reading and things like this. So I wonder if that's potentially interesting avenues to explore as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Amazing, cool. So how about we hear about music meta-genres next from Camilla and Richard?
I can give a quick summary, then Richard can show what he's done. He's done much more than me. So yeah, so we started like with a little bit of that. It's very important, the infrastructure side, like Richard works in R, we had things in Python, so how we do it, how to like make sure that everyone can work. And so I end up working on the notebook that Bill created, and Richard ended up working in R in his computer and making some plots. And so we kind of divided the work in 2 ways. I was working more in trying to build this network of genera. So I'm trying to build a network where the edges of the network, the nodes of the networks are the different type of genres, and the edges is how often they appear together for an artist. And I was just working on trying to make some efficient code to build that network, because we have 1,000 entries, and with 5 to 10 genres per entry. So like all the different combinations can take a little bit of time to build. So yeah, but then Richard was doing some more interesting things. So please, Richard, go ahead.
Hi, so I was just trying to look at the sort of original question that Bill was looking at to see whether the number of classical tracks over time was decreasing. So I was just spent my time wrestling R trying to get something up. So I eventually got a plot after ordering the data correctly. So can everyone see this plot here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So these are the tracks that were picked, ordered by time, and I've summed the number of classical tracks in bins of 50. So that's what each of these points is. So you can see, and this is a line of best fit. So as you can see, over time, there's a lot less classical tracks picked. So here, I think it was in the 50s it started. You've got like about 40 out of 50 were classical, and down here you've only got, I think, about 4 classical tracks out of 50 tracks picked.
Yeah, so it's really a significant drop from going almost 100% or 90%.
Yeah, and you can almost see there's actually a bit of a kink in the data around here, which I haven't actually looked what time that is, but you could probably guess that's 60s or 70s or something. I don't know. Yeah, so there's a lot of potential to look into the data further and find more patterns. And this is just for classical. You could do this for other genres as well. I'm sure you would see other patterns as well.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what is most, which genre is most anti-correlated with this, I guess, like which is taking the place of classical.
Yeah, I guess if you do rock music, it might be a bit opposite to this.
Yeah, that sounds like a safe bet. Amazing, cool. And yeah, so you're working in R as well, so hopefully we're going to hear from Luke about looking into whether we can support our environment, because that would be really, I think, beneficial.
Yeah, so there's a p-value for this line for people that know about p-values, and that's extremely significant. So, but I guess you can see that just from looking at the data in this case. You don't really need to look at the p-value.
Yeah. With is the p-value affected by the binning?
Yeah, it will be slightly, but
It's so
however
yeah,
potentially, but however you bin it, it's gonna it's gonna be significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Yeah, so that's my one plot that I managed to come up with.
It's a beauty. Lovely, amazing. Thank you. Okay, so I have I think we'll want to hear from Andrew and Bill maybe about the real sports.
Yes, so we've had fun wrangling data into the right format. Not got much further than that because we've only just worked out why our plots were going wrong. So we've only just got some plots going.
What was going wrong?
We were sending the wrong object into the data file, into the thing for C1 real plot. I just we just worked that out 5 minutes ago though. So I've only just started looking at the actual data that we've got. And
do you want to tell people a bit about the data that you found?
So yes, on Data Hub, there's a full set of the last 10 years of English Premier League data, which has many different columns which appear to be increasing every year. So there were 60 odd columns in 2009 and there are 70 odd columns now. Clearly they've found more things to do statistics on, but they tend to add the stuff at the end, which is nice. So I think all the data is there that we're interested in for the discipline aspect of what I talked about at the start. So at the moment, we're trying to work out the best way to subtract one column from another and plot that. we haven't quite got there yet, so we've just been plotting columns against each other to start for now. So if anyone knows how to do that, that would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a row for each Premier League match. Is that?
That's correct. Yeah. So there's a row per match, and
so what do you need to subtract to what are you trying to calculate?
So we have basically a column for home goals, a column for away goals, a column for home yellow cards, a column for away yellow cards. We want to do a plot of home goals minus away goals against home yellow cards minus away yellow cards.
Okay, right. Yeah, gotcha.
Although actually we probably want to make it a bit more complicated because I think there's home red cards and away red cards as well. So we probably want to add probably want to add a multiple of that to the yellow card one, because effectively a red card is like 2 yellow cards, I suppose, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. And did you have any plot that was shareable?
I'll share my screen and show you where we're at, but not really very much. So that one. Yeah, so I was just plotting away goals against away yellow cards and seeing if there was anything interesting going on, and whether, obviously the hue doesn't really tell you very much because there are however many teams have been in the Premier League in the last 10 years. So
if you scroll down a little bit, Andrew, there's
oh right, okay.
Tried to do also just again to see that. So this is not the calculation. We're just trying, one column at a time. Or, in this case, the away goals versus away yellow cards, but gives a sense of the data.
Okay, yeah, so we can see kind of where the averages are and the spread of the two. So I guess that's full-time away goals, and then
I think that there are also columns for half-time away goals and things like that as well.
Right.
We could go even more granular.
Right. God, who are these teams that are getting 7+ yellow cards? It's outrageous. Nice, cool. So I guess it's a matter of yeah, like you say, doing the kind of column manipulations and then seeing in more detail what the relationship between these two are.
Yeah.
Lovely stuff. Amazing, thank you. So I think that was all the stories, and then we had also James and Luke, last but not least, looking at the infrastructure, and that was kind of a nebulous topic. But Luke, do you want to enlighten us on what you've been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. So some good news. We had some minor successes. So James unfortunately had to go to give another talk at the moment, so we had to leave us, and Sam joined us for the first few minutes, but we managed to make a little bit of progress. So for context, I suppose, I imagine that not everybody here has heard of Binder. I think the Turing people hopefully have, but some of our other guests have possibly not heard of Binder. So rather than spending a huge amount of time explaining it, I'll tell you the general idea, and I'll drop a link in the chat for anyone who's interested. Essentially, it's a service that allows you to add a little badge to your repository if you have notebooks in it, and by clicking it, it will launch an interactive kind of Jupyter environment in your browser. So under the hood, it spins up a Docker container with all the required dependencies that you outline, and so then the way we use it is that you can then launch from our Turing Data Stories repository. You can launch an instance of Jupyter in your browser and actually run an interactive version of any of the stories that we've written before. So that's the way that we want to, at the moment at least, publish our stories when they're finished, so that any readers can come in and they can play around with what has already been done and try and break it and change things, etc. The issue we were having is that Binder only allows you to specify one environment per per repository, and so we were constrained up until now to using Python 3.7, I think, just because that's what had been used beforehand. But James came along and he wanted to use R to write his story, and doing a little bit of research and making a couple of small changes to the configuration files in our binder directory. This is the binder docs if anybody wants to follow these. But if you go to the Turing Data Stories repository, which is around there somewhere, I've actually cloned it, or rather I forked it. But this is what it looks like. If you go into the binder directory, you'll find an environment file which specifies all the dependencies. And in here, what we've done is we've added in some additional dependencies for R. What that means is then when you launch binder from the README, which I'll show you where that is exactly now, and it looks exactly the same in the actual repository, but there's this button here to launch binder, which I think in the actual repository is broken at the moment. So there's a bug that we've encountered as well that we'll have to fix before any of you can test this out. But when you do launch binder, you get something that looks like this. You come into your launcher, now it's going to break. And now, don't ever try and do anything live. Okay, let me try this one more time. We might be in trouble here. Okay, so I've lost it. But essentially, what you can see behind this grayed out error is that I was able to actually import the tidyverse library and create this vector X and multiply it by 2, which is amazing. But it means that, Richard, when you come along and you're doing something, you don't have to use RStudio. You can write into a Jupyter notebook, which we can then publish. And believe it or not, when we fix a couple of bugs, we can launch an interactive version of it through binder from our repository when any readers come along. The other thing I suppose to point out is that for people who are coming from a background of R, who prepare to code in R and don't particularly like notebooks, the benefit of the Turing Data Stories community is that you can go and you can do whatever you want in RStudio or create in R Markdown, and come to us and we will help you to transfer it over to a Jupyter notebook and deal with the binder issues that you will inevitably encounter. So, please don't be afraid is the point I'm trying to make, to go away, write your story in R if you're more comfortable with that, and come back to us and we will help you to get it publishable and accessible via binder. Although maybe I'm not the person to help you because, as you can see, it's not working so well at the moment. But the point is, we managed to make some progress, and now Turing Data Stories are accessible to our contributors.
Amazing, fantastic. That sounds like a lot of progress, and yeah, it's definitely an excellent point to highlight the support that is available from the community. If you want to focus on one aspect of writing a story and need a bit of help with the other aspects, that's definitely something that we want to provide as much help as possible with. So that was great to hear about all the amazing work that's been done. Thanks so much, everyone, for getting stuck in. And I think what I'm going to do now is hand over to Christina, who's going to do the final wrap up.
Yep. Hi, guys. Just a really quick one. But thank you for joining. I hope I speak for the whole of the new and extended Turing Data Stories community that we had some fun and didn't get a whole lot done coding wise, but hopefully that serves as a motivation for us to all kind of continue working on the stories that we've just been introduced to. So basically just want to wrap up and say, yeah, thanks for joining. Please keep in touch. I'm just going to post I think I can do it in the Slack, but I'll also post it in the HackMD, the link to our Slack community. And what we'd really appreciate you guys to do is join that, so get involved on the Slack community. And also, if you would like to continue working on the stories, so the new stories, that's the esports and the sporting discipline story, definitely make a new channel in the Slack and add everybody who was involved with that, as well as this. Yeah, I'm Richard also. Please feel free to join the Desert Island story channel as well for that one that already exists. Other than that, we meet every Wednesday afternoon, and I believe that Camilla will be able to follow up with an invitation to that kind of collaborative hack session that we do to kind of work on stories and also give community updates as well. Is there anything else that you would like me to mention, Camilla, or could we wrap up there just about on the dot?
If you can join on Wednesday afternoons, like feel free to also organize a hack session and just put it on the Slack, and some of us will join. And yeah, that's kind of what we work. We usually organize sessions where we try to like hack something up together, and it doesn't have to be on Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, it's more like making sure the project is going and welcome new joiners and things like that. But yeah, thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, take care, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thank you, everybody, for being involved. All right, let's stay friends.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, bye.